All right, which subset of the real numbers does 22 belong? Well, it's a natural number because that's the ones that happen out there in nature if you're counting things, right? And you only start counting things if there's something there to count. So you start with one, right? One, two, blah, blah, blah. That's what natural numbers do, okay? But uh, whole numbers is just the natural numbers plus zero. So it's also a part of the whole number group because if we start at zero and we go up by 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, you're going to get to 22 in there as well. Okay. It happens to be an integer because integers are any positive or negative uh, or zero numbers that are starting at 0, 1 unit jumps from 0 on the number line. So going to the left, it would be -1, -2, -3, -4. Going to the right would be 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can jump by single units and land right on 22. And of course, it is a rational number because you could write it as a ratio. Any whole number you could put over 1. And then you have the ratio that you need for it to be a rational number. Okay? So, moving on. It says, what is an inequality that compares the numbers square root of 70 and 8.5? Well, this is an interesting one because square root of 70 we know is square root of 70 is somewhere between the square root of 64, which is 8, and the square root of 81, which is 9. So it's somewhere between 8 and 9, and so is this. Okay? So how do we check it? How could we possibly know? Well, here's the tip. Okay, if you take the number 8.5, you can square 8.5, or another way of saying it is 8.5. You can take 8.5, square it. Let's do that. 25, carry the 2. 5 times 8 is 40, plus 2 is 42. 0 placeholder. 8 times 5 is 40, carry the 4. 8 times 8 is 64, plus 4 is 68. Add them together. Okay, and what we get there, I'm going to write it up here. What we get there is a 5, a 2, a 12, carry the 1, and a 7. And then there are 2 digits behind the decimal, so the answer is 2 digits behind the decimal. Okay? So that is what 8.5 is when you square it. Why do I care about that? Oops. Because, let me get this out of the way so I can do it. Because that means that you could represent 8.5 by writing the square root of 72.25. Because what's the square root of 72.25? We just figured it out by multiplying the number that made it. Okay? If you multiply the number 8.5 and get by itself and you get 72.25, then the square root of this is 8.5. This is the same as 8.5, right? Okay, now let's compare it to the square root of 70. Well, clearly, that one's bigger because it's a bigger number that you're square rooting, right? You're going to have a bigger root in order for it to square to be 72.25 instead of just 70. Okay, so rather than try and calculate out what's the square root of 70 to a whole bunch of decimal places, you can just say, well, why don't I just square this? And if that's a bigger number, then this is inside, then the square root of 72.25, also known as 8.5, has to be bigger than the square root of this. So that then becomes your answer. Okay? That inequality relates them. And I could write it on here as saying like that. It would be like that. Square root of 70 is less than 8.5. Okay. All right, now, what's the order from least to greatest for number 16? Well, I'm going to see what integers these are in between. Okay, square root of 5, let's take it. Square root of 5 is somewhere between the square root of 4, which is 2, and the square root of 9, which is 3. So this number is between, okay, it's between 2 and 3. So between 2 and 3. Yeah? Okay. This number right here, negative 0.1, well, that's between 0 and negative 1. So I'm going to say that's between 0 and negative 1. Okay? Uh, 0 and negative 1 is maybe a better way to write it than what I wrote for this one. So that 2 and 3. Between 2 and 3, between 0 and negative 1. Negative 5/3. Let's examine that one. Well, negative 5/3 is between negative 3/3, which is negative 1, and negative 6/3, which is negative 2. Negative 5/3 is right between them. Okay, so that's between negative 1 and negative 2. Just going on what the integers are around it. Okay, between negative 1 and negative 2. 0.7. 0.7 is between 0 and 1. And I should probably mark the numbers that go along with the things that they're between, right? This one's between that and that, and this one's between that and that. And square root of 2, that's between the square root of 1, which is 1, and the square root of 4, which is 2. So that one's between 1 and 2. Okay, so I'm going to say between 1 and 2. So then if we had a number line, we would say, okay, what's the biggest one? Well, the biggest one we've got is the square root of 5, because that's between 2 and 3. Actually, let's go from least. What's the least? Well, being between negative 1 and negative 2, that's the lowest. Negative 5/3. Okay? Between negative 1 and negative 2 right there. Okay? Between negative 1 and 0, that's this. So negative 0.1. Between negative 1 and 0. And between 0 and 1 is right here, 0.7. Between 1 and 2 is right here, square root of 2. And finally, between 2 and 3, right here, square root of 5. That's how you can order them. Figure out what two integers they're between, and as you can see, like it is in this case, there's a good chance that you're going to not have two numbers landing between the same integers, and so therefore you can place them properly in their relation. You want to struggle to go more specific than just between two integers. Hope that helped.